All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of BSV ELI5. I am your host, Brett Banfe, Manifestable, and I am joined today by my very special guest, Rory Zimmerman. Rory, how are you today?
Good morning, Brett. I'm lovely. How are you?
I'm feeling so wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me, for being a part of this, and for taking this next step in the BSV ELI5 adventure. Yeah, I really appreciate you coming on today.
Definitely, yes. So I have my headphones in. Is the microphone okay?
You sound excellent.
Oh, good. Well, happy Pi Day, Brett.
Wow, I forgot it's Pi Day. So yeah, that's very special. you know,
Yes, we got to get out and have some delicious pies.
yeah, exactly. And pi is irrational, right? It's an irrational number, but there's something very rational about the irrational. So it's a perfect day to celebrate the rational side of the irrational.
Indeed, yes. Well, I really enjoyed participating last week, and I'm looking forward to the quality time with you here today.
Thank you. And then, yeah, for those that don't know, I have invited Rory to take over as my host of the BSV ELI5 Twitter Spaces weekly. We're going to keep it at this time slot. And Rory, you graciously accepted. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That's so special and so wonderful. As a lot of people have known through the spaces that I've already hosted on this, when I first got into BSV, I found it that there was so much fascinating information out there. Every single, it was all new to me. I didn't have really too much of a background in understanding this stuff, which in some ways maybe was a benefit because there was nothing that I needed to unlearn about the old ways as I was just analyzing the new model for BSV. And but I found that a lot of that information was difficult to gather. It was scattered all in many kind of remote places. And so part of what I was interested in doing in building and running this program is just to really have a resource for people to get some basic information. They might not have a background in blockchain. They don't understand what a hash is. They don't have a background in cryptography or any of this stuff. And but BSV is so fascinating, and it's so all encompassing in terms of what it represents, that I think it is uh, just a fount of information for people to gather.
Certainly. And I find that too. I'm always learning. And then there's always more to discover. And it takes time to digest a lot of the topics involved in Bitcoin blockchain. You have the economics, you have the politics, you have the use cases, you have all the technology and the art involved. So there's always more to cover. As I was invited to be a member of the Women of BSV a couple years ago, I learned a lot from the various entrepreneurs there. And Ruth and Diddy, they gave me the skills to then set me up for success as I hosted my own podcast called Be in the Moment, like a bumblebee. And yes, always buzzing around, learning more. But the thing is that it's difficult when you're working full time, you're volunteering in your neighborhood, in your local community, then the availability to set interviews and edit videos, it becomes scarce. So when you invited me to host this opportunity, I relish it because it gives me the chance to continue the conversation and to continuously learn in a very easy method. I just join you here and join our guests, and we continue to explore and learn.
Yeah, and you touched on the women of BSV. We just last week we were celebrating International Women's Day, and we had a wonderful a wonderful show with just a host of amazing women that are within the BSV community, and not all are members of that group you mentioned, the Women of BSV, which has its own podcasts and its own shows, and regular contributors, etc., which you are a member. But maybe could you just give me some of what are some of the things. We're obviously talking about women from diverse backgrounds with different interests, different areas of expertise, etc. But maybe what are some of the kind of like common threads that go through not only that group, the Women of BSV, but you know uh, the all of the women within the broader BSV ecosystem?
Oh, yes. Well, of course, first and foremost, I'd give a shout out to Ray. Her handle is at Kitty Treats on Twitter. She is both a hacker and developer, as well as a podcast host, a business leader, producer of businesses on the blockchain. And I've learned a lot from collaborating with her on Be in the Moment podcasts. And then there's also many excellent men that have really been great colleagues with the women in BSV. So I know that one of Ray's colleagues has been great helping me with tech support sometimes. And then others like Sylvain and I, we have collaborated to bring tutorials together. And yes, speaking of the many women, the women are all around the world. And that is what I love, is to interact and learn about different cultures, whether it's their cuisine culture or their lifestyle, daily life culture. So last week, that was very exciting to join as Krez was the host. Krez has been fantastic at the BSV Association, bringing women together from all around the world that are focused on different topics of industry. I recall she had interviewed a lady that was involved with using blockchain technology to track the recycling of plastics in the ocean. And then we also spoke last week of the need for women across Africa in many rural areas to access water. So I have been consumed in my mind thinking of that topic ever since. I wonder, why has this problem continued for so long? I think that as we meet regularly on these Explain Like I'm Five spaces, we can focus, we can hone in on solving real world problems with the utility of BSV blockchain. And another shout out I would love to give is to One Love, who has been a lady hosting many spaces on Twitter Spaces. And she is bold and beautiful and practical. And I always do enjoy when I tune in and hear her there. Sometimes the Twitter Spaces can just get real casual and people talk about what they're making for dinner. And, it's more like a big group phone call. And that can be a lot of fun too.
Yes. And sorry about that. My my microphone was off for just a second. But yeah, and another thing about One Love too, just very patient. I love how patient she is in terms of there's something about blockchain that can oftentimes, and I think that there's first of all, this is a technology, so it's hard to imagine people getting so irate about a technology. Like, for example, my TV in my living room is Samsung, but the neighbor's TV is LG or something like this, or whatever. And could you
Yeah.
imagine like getting into a dispute, like getting really heated over like the technology that your TV is using or something like this? It's silly, but yet we've seen that people can get very very irate about some of this stuff. And so my experience with One Love is just, like a really patient and, calm person, where she just, is like, hey, if you have to get that out, like, then get it out. And like, it's like a family member, you like get really irate and upset at your family member, but at the end of the day, um there's kind of like that deeper mission that's behind it, and maybe I could transition this to the concept of what we would consider to be like a family within a technology layer, or a network, which is this concept of the small world network. So can you maybe share with me any of, one of the things that I found so fascinating when I first started learning about BSV was this concept called a small world network. It sounds a little bit complicated, like what does this network have to do with small worlds? What is the implications here? But really, like, I think a natural parallel to that is kind of like a family,
Hmm.
because it's a group that is so closely knit together, that really you have the ability to ordinary things that maybe wouldn't be appropriate, with just a random stranger or a person on the street or something like this. Like, like, for example, you get into a moment of frustration and slam the door in someone's face or something like this, your brother's face or something. And that's like inappropriate behavior in certain settings, especially with strangers, people that you don't know. But within family, there's like a deeper kind of a deeper, as they say, blood is thicker than water. And it's this understanding of that depth that allows a little bit more of a free range of expression. And sometimes that includes expression that isn't always the expression that we're the most proud of, but that freedom of that expression is sort of rooted back in this concept of this small world network, or this familial network. Can you maybe share any thoughts on that?
Oh, certainly. To me, the small world, of course, I think of it's a small world after all. And, that's the first thing that comes to mind. But really, I think at the essence, it's that the power of one person is very strong. And so an individual can make an impact. And then that individual knows another individual who then it can be a ripple effect. And almost again, we come back to that Fibonacci sequence of the swirls and on to infinity is within the individual acting authentically and empowered. And then the small group is the power network. It's not necessarily some big overarching structure that has the power, but it is in the individual, I believe, and in individuals that collaborate and thrive together. That to me is the small world network. And even furthermore, it would be about the lily pads, the jumps. So, for example, if you think of someone famous or far reaching, you may be only one or two hops away from that person. You have the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that this has, these are parables. A lot of times, sometimes, we go back to things that we've learned through our grandmothers and our grandmothers' grandmothers, et cetera. And it's oftentimes surprising how many of these, what would our grandmothers and their grandmothers know about Bitcoin? Likely nothing, right? But turns out that they know a ton about Bitcoin, not because they predicted or could foresee the rise of this technology, but because they know enough about the basic reality. And Bitcoin just is a expression of the true instincts in humankind, right? There's going to be people who are working to build, there's going to be people who are trying to tear down. This is not something that came into being with the emergence of Bitcoin. Bitcoin is just another stage for the drama of the human condition to manifest itself. So I really like that answer. That's a really wonderful answer. One of the stories that I've grown up and always loved is the story of the small boy, the old man, and the starfish on the beach. Have you ever heard this story?
Oh, I think I have, but I don't remember it. Can you tell me?
Yeah. So, and again, this has these parallels to what we're talking about with blockchain and with proof of work and with honest signal, et cetera, and the small world nature that you were just describing of a one person's efforts having an impact on the future of the rest of the network. But yeah, there's this story that goes. There's a small boy. He's walking along the beach near dusk, and there's an old man sitting back on the dunes, and across the whole beach it's littered with starfish, and they've all been washed ashore and they're beached, and so the little boy is walking along the beach and he's just picking the starfish up and he's just chucking it right back into the water, and the boy is kind of like the naivety of like youth, just thinking that it can make a difference in the world, and the old man is looking at him and saying, like, look as far as the eye can see, up this beach, down this beach, and what do you see? Nothing but starfish laying in the sand, like, so you can take this effort, but what is this at the end of the day? What is this going to achieve? And what does this even matter? And the boy like stops and listens to the man make his point, and then, stoops down, picks up another starfish, and says, "Well, it matters to this one," and then he throws that one back into the water. So that concept has always really resonated with me, and it sounds like it does with you too, and that is something that you know carries with it the significance of that small world network, because we all hear the the concept that everything's interconnected, and one person's actions can impact the fate and futures of others, etc. And even if it's a small and maybe seemingly insignificant act, it can have ripple effects. There's like a a sort of a depersonalization of that concept, which is that, like, that concept of the butterfly's wing that flaps and then causes like the hurricane in Japan or something like this, right? Which, that to me, it's like almost like it's a little bit different than the concept that we're describing, because that's more of a like a cause and effect, right? That whereas what we're describing, it's beyond just simply cause and effect. Like, cause and effect really describes the way in which one action will have like a series of repercussions that create a event in the future. And you can think of this like dominoes. You stack all of the dominoes up, right, in a line, and then you knock the first one. You don't have to guess. The cause and effect is going to demonstrate to you that last domino is going to fall. Whereas what we're describing, I think, and I think within Be in the Moment, and your articulation of that small world network, is not that there's a like a cause and effect, like a necessary outcome. So, like, for example, if I help an elderly woman cross the street, that doesn't mean, like, it's not in the same way that a domino will fall that I will win the lottery the next time I go to the gas station or something like this, just because I put some good into the world. Like, but that there is this deeper web that we participate within, and that web necessarily, like you said, the 6 degrees of separation from Kevin Bacon, that just the existence of that web alone, even if it doesn't produce a definitive outcome for a set of actions, it still is enough to get us out of our little hermit crab shell where we live in this isolation, and communicating and interacting and engaging with others in a meaningful way.
That is very thoughtful. Yes, Brett. There's a lot to that. So I think that, yeah, the butterfly effect, it seems almost powerless, and it relates something to do with the tragedy. It's that something innocent and inspiring, like a butterfly's wings flapping, will cause a disaster. So that whole concept, I don't find that very empowering. Like, for example, with hopping, the small world network. I feel that's more uplifting, empowering, and that throughout all of history, this is a moment where we can really let people be the the ones that save the day. Everybody can make a difference, and uh, maybe in the past uh, we didn't have access to information like we do today. So in the past, if people got a newspaper, they that would be the authority, and it's just like having a spell broken when you realize that, oh my gosh, I'm empowered. I can do more than what a newspaper says, or we can all be free to grow and choose and build as we like. So I think that with Bitcoin, we have this opportunity within economics and the digital economy, the digital world, but we also have the chance to record and include everyone all around the world. So if we could solve the water scarcity issue for women in rural parts of Africa, then they could potentially open up their imaginations to solving other problems that need to be taken care of, or to learn and grow as builders. And I think that our mindset is so important with everything that we do, that we can do. And I think that Bitcoin is a big opportunity there, like BSV blockchain, with bringing transparency, accountability, as well as with the pseudonymy. It's always hard for me to say that word, but there's a lot of opportunity there. And also, we see a lot with BSV blockchain related to national currencies. So that is another issue I'd love for us to really focus on over these talks, because what I did learn from Jerry David Chan, especially, is that in the nature of Bitcoin is that privacy coupled with transparency. And it sounds like it would never go together, but in fact, it's a part of its essence. So that is exciting. I know that there's a lot of different passionate views there. People feel passionate about, no, we should just have everything be Bitcoin, or some people say Monero, or other people say XRP, and so there's that debate. But we have that opportunity just in the essence of the initial Bitcoin blockchain to have both privacy and transparency. So that's an exciting opportunity. And then, of course, we have Terranode that we're all learning about, has processed, I'm not sure of the figures, maybe you know more of the exact data, the amount, but they have a massive throughput that could sustain potentially clients like AWS and even
Yeah,
possibly national currencies.
absolutely. And the um the the value proposition of this, one of the things that we go back to, the security of data systems. Again, we're like, this is one of the reasons why I love BSV so much, because we can be having these philosophical discussions and talking about, being in the moment, and, our impact on the world and the butterfly's wings. And this directly relates to, network data structures, that things that, there's the BSV is a real practical employment, or a opportunity to demonstrate the improvement that a system that is distributed in the manner in which BSV is, what that represents um, for the participants in that system. So, one of the things that you talked about was, water scarcity and um, and how, if you were to solve the issue of water, what could you be capable of? And what this brings to mind is this, the hierarchy of needs. If I had to guess, I would say you are a fan of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Is that correct?
Oh, I've heard of it before. I remember self-actualization is at the top.
Yes, yes, exactly. And so, but you need to solve them in order, right? Because if you are looking for water, you can't be going around trying to become self-actualized. You need to be self-hydrated before you can self-actualize. And
Right.
but that if you solve these basic needs for security and things of this nature, what can that mean for the next areas that you begin to focus on? And so, we talk a lot of times within the BSV world about data structures and siloed organizations. So, you know, if you think back to before, maybe more back to the 1990s or something like this, the leading you know places where you would be getting the cutting edge in technology would be like the Radio Shack or something like this. But every Radio Shack had to have your phone number when you checked out. And I always used to think, what does this Radio Shack really need my data for? Like, why do they need to know who I am? I'm just buying these batteries. And what that exposes is sort of some of the fundamental flaws of having to take on too much responsibility. So this Radio Shack, all they want to do is be a retailer of electronic goods. That's what they're good at. They're good at setting up stores in my local town, selling me batteries, or maybe a radio, an alarm clock, or something like this. That's what they're really good at. But because of the fact that they need to sell these radios and batteries, et cetera, they also need to gather this data about me as a customer. But now they need to have an entire wing or division of their team, um, of their um, of their operation, that is in charge of securing all of that data and maintaining it and managing it, et cetera. And this is not necessarily what they're good at. And so we see this all over, and every single company, no matter what they're doing, they need to have this second IT department within their company that's just set up to manage and process all of this data. The reality is, though, with the introduction of things like the blockchain, you can offload that responsibility to data processors that actually have the means and capability to actually manage that. And when we look at the pain points for keeping data secure, oftentimes what you're seeing is that the classic case of a breach of data will include oftentimes a deletion of any files that would tip that anything had been breached, right? So this would be like the example of, let's say that you have someone comes into your home, like it's a movie, like someone's coming into your home to bug your house or something like this, right? They're going in, and they're using gloves when they go through, and they'd want to cover their tracks that they've actually been in, because otherwise they as soon as you walk to the front door, if the thing was pried open with a crowbar, you're like, hey, then I'm gonna search the house now, right? So these the data penetrators, they want to cover their tracks, and this is the unique value proposition that a database like a blockchain that is write once, read many offers, is that it is, you write to that database once. So if you do make a mistake on the database, the ledger, then you can append it. But just like in traditional accounting practices, if you make a mistake with the input of a data value, you don't delete that, but you leave a trail for that mistake having been there, and then you just append it by adding some additional data that basically adds context to this. I made a mistake. I said I received 10,000 pallets. I actually only received 1,000 because I hit an extra zero or something like this. So we're talking about this, these abstract concepts, but they really relate back to these very fundamental data security practices. And what I really love about it is that I've used this example a few times, but the concept of church and state, that there wasn't a real separation between these concepts of church and state. They sort of came up together. Both were fairly good at convincing people of certain things, whether those were in their best or not necessarily their best interest. But they both sort of specialized in that, and
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 they both
so
specialized in storing data.
that's right, they do, and they both make their actions based on that data as well, right? That's key, and I think and also they both represent a central pillar, to a worldview or to an outlook. Now, um, the state would be much more of uh, a secular central pillar, but it's a central pillar nonetheless, right? Whereas the church would be the opposite of that, right? It's a central pillar of belief, and but the concept is that up until this point we've really required this central tent pole to really have everything be under, and I think what you see with the emergence of blockchain technology is really the way in which we can separate the concept of data ownership from the other values. So, like, church provides a lot of value, and state provides a lot of value. Neither of them are 100%. Like they're not batting 100. Sometimes they overextend their value, and there's individual examples of that. But for the most part, these represent value to the ability for humankind to flourish. But it's just that when they have when they're fighting for that same place to be that data repository, like as you were saying, then they naturally sort of tend to chip away at each other instead of sort of standing apart and being pillars in their own right. And so I really see this opportunity as being that the separation of this of the values that these institutions have with their um, the requirement that they have to maintain and manage all of this data, which becomes burdensome to them, right? It makes it so that they can't be as good at selling batteries because they have to have this like giant monkey on their back that's managing all of this data that they've collected from me that they supposedly need but don't ever actually use. And instead, by separating that from the commerce side of the free market, I think what we will see is kind of like a revolution in the ability to provide better services for customers and to have to compete to provide those services.
That is so interesting. Yes. I know that Certihash from Smart Ledger, they gave a presentation at the London Blockchain Conference along those lines. And I've heard Brian speak with Joshua Hensley before on a podcast talking about the ways that their Certihash can be used in that way to as a cybersecurity tool. But I wonder, yes, we have those various pillars, uh, but what about with the blockchain? So we have BSV blockchain that is the scaled version of Bitcoin, and that has the capacity to run the throughput of the world's data ever more. So as it continues to become ever more anti-fragile and grow. Shout out to that Daniel Krawitz, right? Or is it Krawitz? Krawitz? Yeah, I think it's Krawitz, like pray. Yes. So anyway, yeah, he would always talk about the anti-fragile nature of Bitcoin, but that is with the BSV blockchain. Of course, is it has that capacity to run that throughput of data, and then with the ever diminishing price of fees, transaction fees. So that is the real win in the market. But there is then the question of the apps. So yes, okay, the blockchain can run this security, but then what about CertaHash? Is that an app on the blockchain, or is it an entity that's off of it but just running data through it? How can we visualize these many use cases, or even Unisot? Unisot had the plugin for your ERP data and can track the source of the food all the way through to the recycling of the packaging of the product. So it's the life cycle tracking that could be very useful to many major companies and even small businesses. So, Brett, how can we conceptualize the many different uh, businesses that are running on the blockchain?
Yeah, and I think it's a great question. I'm gonna maybe take a less than uh, typical way of kind of getting to that answer, but I want to go back to something you mentioned before about the Fibonacci sequence, and for those that don't know the Fibonacci sequence, it is the series of numbers that you get when you take the previous number and you add it to the new number. So if we start with, I think, one, and then one plus the previous number, which is zero, would be one. And then one plus the previous number, which is one, would be two. Two plus the previous number, which is one, would be three, et cetera. And you continue this onward, right? So you end up seeing this data pattern that emerges, that it's always been there. The data pattern's always been there, and it turns out that this is one of the most fun things I think about when you get older, because when you get older, you begin life in this very magical uh, perspective of things, of like, the cloud is following me, and I have this like intimate relationship with the world all around me. And then like you sort of learn the that that some of that is just illusion, right? It seems like when you're walking along the grass and you're looking up, and it seems like the cloud is following you, but it's not actually following you, etc. So there's this like separation there, where you get a kind of a disenchantment with the world, right? And then the reconstituting back of that enchantment. I think the Fibonacci sequence is a good example of how you can reconstitute that enchantment, because this data pattern has always existed. Um, it exists on its own, right? It doesn't necessarily need anyone to tell it to exist. It just it's I think it's like autopoiesis. It spontaneously arises, or it self-organizes, um, and and it turns out that nature follows this pattern. So if you look through, you can, I'm sure a lot of you are already familiar with this pattern. So, but yeah, you can do a quick Google search to find out all the ways in which this pattern is repeated throughout nature. And yet, how that relates to the blockchain is that, okay, so if we didn't have, let's just say for the sake of discussion, that we have this zero, or this number one, as this anchor point, and from that anchor point we can extend this. We can use the data of that number one to create this pattern, and it turns out to be a very important pattern. But if we didn't have that starting point of one, then imagine that we live in a world where you know there's no such thing as the individuation of a concept or an idea, right? So we can't analyze the concept of one as distinct from two and zero. They all sort of mishmash, right? They're all together. So in that world, right, we probably wouldn't be able to determine this golden ratio, right? Because we would just say like, we can't start at one because it's not really an individuated concept that we can begin from. So like, we would, if we were to pick a number to begin from, we would sort of pick one at random. And then once you pick one at random, you lose the significance of the pattern of that data. And so the point is that it's actually being able to trace that pattern back to an origination point that gives the pattern meaning. And the example that I want to use is like a tangible real world example. It may not be the best example, but it's the first one I could think of, which is like a hot air balloon. Okay, so imagine like, the concept of like building data applications that use blockchain and this, everything that we're describing about the utility, the scalability of global currencies and provenance of data and all this stuff. you know if you just look at it when it's on the ground, you're explaining to someone like, okay, so that part right there, so I light a fire over here above this basket, and that part right there is going to fill with air, and then the air is lighter than the other air, so it lifts us up off the ground. And all of these concepts are like totally foreign, right? You're like, well, fire is dangerous, that sounds very scary, why are you lighting things on fire, especially near this wooden basket? This sounds like a disaster, and you're going to light it right under this piece of cloth, like the cloth is flammable. And how, I'm not even so clear that air can be lighter than air. I mean, isn't air? So how could air be lighter than air, right? So you're explaining it to someone, and they're just like, okay, well, there's all these reasons why they can doubt the veracity of that, But then you actually, this is what we're seeing with the BSV blockchain, is that, we may not be in the atmosphere right now, because, we're talking about unbounded scalability and millions of transactions per second, right? If we imagine that that's like being suspended in the hot air balloon and looking down on the world below us, right? Then, up to this point, we have gotten the basket off the ground, right? We're doing these 4 gigabyte blocks. So, and we're demonstrating that the balloon does hold the air, that the air is lighter than the other air, that the basket may be flammable and the balloon may be flammable, but if you put them in the proper alignment, they don't catch each other on fire, et cetera. So you're like, you're putting the the work in to actually demonstrate that the concept does work, but it needs to continue to be fleshed out, right? We may need a bigger balloon, right? We're imagining that we can get up into the atmosphere with a 4 gigabyte balloon, but maybe what we really need is a bigger one. So the I guess the reason how that relates back to this, how do we analyze and interpret this data, is that we really need what the data needs. It doesn't need us to come along and say, this is the pattern that you're supposed to produce, so we don't tell the golden ratio that it's mean is supposed to be 1.61. We don't tell it like, hey, like that's not how the scientific method works, right? Like we begin with the hypothesis, we test the hypothesis, and if the hypothesis is wrong, we have to go back to the drawing board, right? And then we need to be truthful and honest about the results that we're getting, and we need to all the time be cautious of using our confirmation bias to arrive at the results that we want to arrive at, instead of the results that the world is actually indicating to us. And what that requires is that it requires that immutability of the data points, because like, again, if we don't have the number 1 as this concept of an individuated idea, then we can't analyze what happens when you create that Fibonacci sequence out of that. Well, these patterns and these data sequences, I mean, human beings just on a whole are like pattern producing machines. I mean, like we can't not produce patterns. If the thing is that we lack is really the ability to properly evaluate them and to interpret them and to reflect on them. And one of the reasons why we lack that ability is because we lack the ability to necessarily like have that objectivity, right? So a lot of times, and this is the concept of the postmodern condition, which is that this idea that by observing something we're influencing it, right? This is the kind of if you had to summarize what postmodernism is, then that's the idea, right? And and yeah, that's really true, because in a way, this is what we were talking about, the confirmation bias. We need to be able to remove ourselves from this process. So an example of this, is like, okay, we're out there, we're doing research. We want to do research based on ice, cores, the ice cores from, you know tens of thousands of years ago, but all of that data is really being stored on our own private servers, our own databases. And maybe the project is being funded by some people who have a particular slant or a bias or whatever. We in a way are sort of victim to that concept, the postmodern philosophical concept that we are influencing our own results. And we're not necessarily doing it on purpose. Sometimes it is on purpose. That's another thing. But, oftentimes it's just by accident, right? Like we just, it's the way in which we assume things that leads us to how to do the control experiment, and then the control experiment is naturally manipulated by our own assumptions. And so the broader concept of how we use the blockchain to properly interpret and analyze data is that the blockchain, by being that third party, the triple entry accounting that's like been talked about by Ian Grigg, et cetera, in a way it gives us that sort of separation that we were talking about before, the separation of church and state, the separation of the recorder of the data from the management of that data, that allows for the a new set of patterns to emerge. And those patterns might be, just as important as the Fibonacci sequence. They could be patterns that we don't know. We have no idea what these patterns are, because we haven't been able to individuate these data points in a way that is separate from our own constructing of them. And the blockchain really represents the first point at which we can reliably do that, and that it's not a burden. The cost for doing that isn't a burden to actually going out and recording that data. So that's why you can have like a project like Weather SV. Some people laugh at Weather SV or say, oh, they're putting data on chain, weather data. What is the significance of this data to me? Well, maybe there isn't significance of that data to that particular person. So that's why they wouldn't put it on chain. But what is the significance of the data? Who knows? 10 years from now, 15 years from now, there may be these new advancements or things where we look back and we go, oh, wow, we really wish that we had this reliable data that was sort of third party objective. It wasn't being managed by the inputter, et cetera. That would be really great if we had this. I mean, if we could go back throughout the annals of history and look at what is the truthful and accurate data and information about the all of the the history of mankind, it would be just so invaluable to us. So it's a little bit like what are the new patterns that are going to emerge? Well, we don't exactly know, but what we need to do is sort of get out of the way of allowing those patterns to emerge by using a blockchain as a immutable store of that data.
Wow. That's so beautiful, Brett. I love that visual of the hot air balloon. That is so helpful to visualize. And everything that you were just talking about is super exciting, and I love it. So I'm glad we're doing this. But then I wonder, how about Jerry Maguire, show me the money. What about the transactions in this system? So, yes, we have the integrity of recording the data and this opportunity to, I suppose we could say, offload the recording of the data onto this immutable system. But then there are the transactions that are the mechanism for stamping that data. So why? How does the money play in the transaction processing?
Yeah, it's a great question. And there's a a whole series of kind of things that we could go down. One of the things that I like to to go back to, although this is more of an esoteric concept, but this idea that we can divide the responsibility of producing that data appropriately. So, and the classic example of this is the example of being a node on the network to begin with, right? A node does a number of functions. It builds blocks, right? It broadcasts transactions. It builds block templates. It hashes. It finds proof of work, etc. There's many different functions that this one single entity performs, and we can think of this as like, if we just use the same example of the family, right? There's many different actions, that a family performs, right? And those actions get distributed in a way that makes the most sense for that family. Same as a corporation. There's responsibilities that the corporation has, and not every, if the finance team had to manage the marketing meetings, et cetera, we would see a whole different approach, and vice versa to that, because there are specific areas in which they excel, and other areas where maybe they don't have as much expertise. And so this is the just the natural way of the world. And I think it goes back to the concept of like Adam Smith and the baker, and the bricklayer, etc., where the specialization and division of labor is economically incentivized, and it's the confluence and congruence of these various different trades and their specialization that actually creates a whole system. And it's really important for the reason that no single point on no single okay, so let's just say that we live in a small town, and everybody uses each other's expertise. So there's a lawn care specialist, there's a carpenter, there's a baker, etc. And so we're a completely contained and enclosed system. But we're better, right? It's like one of those things where the whole is better than the sum of its parts, because at no point along that path, when you find just one single agent in that closed system, like maybe just the lawn care specialist, right? um you know there's no that if everyone were to adopt the lawn care specialist view, the whole would become worse, right? Because it's only by the fact that there are many differing views that you actually get to a point where you exceed the total value that the sum individually represents, right? It's the combination of they're all offsetting each other, right? Because let's face it, as one of my uh, you know favorite philosophers, Ken Wilber, he says no one is smart enough to be 100% wrong. So everyone has some component or form of their own, what they're overlooking, or their own confirmation bias. And the best method that we've developed yet to account for all of these confirmation biases is this interplay between them all. But it makes a lot of sense that, okay, if we lived in, like, let's say we lived in an oasis, or there's nothing, we're in the middle of a desert, there's just this little small town of 1,000 people, and then nothing else, no other way to get outside um of that network, that small world network. You have some incentive to cooperate with each other, just because you sort of all depend on each other. But when we aren't in that really completely enclosed and contained system, where we have the ability to say, okay, you know what, I don't really agree with these ideas, I'm just going to leave the state that's supporting these ideas, or I'm going to leave the jurisdiction, I'm going to relocate myself to a place that's more conducive to my value structure. you know um there is less of an incentive to all work together, right? Because at the end of the day, leaving that system is an option. And so by
Mm.
including these
It's
transactions, yeah, what were you going to say?
it's like what Jordan Peterson says about marriage.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, also, I'm thinking that my question, it is also an opportunity now that I'm thinking more about it with you, because that's a business opportunity for businesses to build and to monetize, don't you think?
Hey, I'm sorry, Roy, I dropped you just there for a second. Can you repeat that?
Yes, I was just saying that the opportunity is to monetize. So the question is, how do the where's the incentive with the transaction processing? But that's the opportunity for entrepreneurs to come in and to monetize and to set up some of their own businesses where they can uh, then record the data and have some kind of incentive. Maybe, oh, send it to us and we can uh, do this or that with it, such as Weather SV. Send us your uh, weather data and we will upload it. And then within our system, you can see all this information. Is that how Weather SV operates?
Well, yes, and just and to add to that, maybe I would add one more sort of visual metaphor. I do a lot of these visual metaphors, so they help me to because we're talking about dense, complex stuff, So like the hot air balloon, the butterfly, all of this stuff. But one more visual metaphor is like the bed of nails. This is like the famous. You go to to the land of the Arabian Nights, and there's the mystifying acts of humankind where like they can lay on a bed of nails, etc. And it's very cheeky, but this the concept of laying on the bed of nails, this is the concept of distributing workload across a pooled network of talent. The amount of talented people within the space of BSV is so mind-blowing, and
It is.
like and so much of this network is willing to do work on your behalf for very low costs, because it's a demonstration of the value of the network, right? But at the end of the day, that's really the value proposition, is being able to take your workload, which when it's entirely on your shoulders, is it can become unbearable. It's like the Apollo, who has the world on, or Atlas, who has the world on his back, and you take that same load and you just distribute it across, just like the bed of nails. But the key is that to have that, you use an economic incentive structure to keep that load supported, right? Because if you just leave it to whichever way the wind blows, then the next thing you know, the wind is blowing the direction of whatever the public opinion is that day, and that doesn't necessarily reflect the values of the group that is, to which that information is relevant, right? It's we see this all the time, where the opinions of a very small minority, a very small and loud minority, end up influencing the shape and the course of um, the cultural narrative. And so you use economic structures and economic incentives in a way to reorient the populace so that they have a vested interest in each other's success, right? Like, it's one of those things where you could the your benefit, if everyone else fails, like you could have all of the money in the world or something like this, and no one else has any, but that's not really success, right? Because it's really like the ability for that system to balance itself out, that makes any of that valuable to begin with, right? If you had all of it and everyone else had a complete absence of it, then I think
There would
it
be nothing to
defeats the
buy.
concept. Exactly. Exactly. So I want to thank you so much for being our guest here on the BSV ELI5 show. We have a follow-up show, a very exciting one coming up, that will be in the same channel. So it's still BSV blockchain. We have our guest will be Xiaowei Liu, and he will be doing a high level overview for developers on script, especially talking about his upcoming hackathon. But Rory, this has been such a pleasure and a privilege to have this session with you, and I'm really excited and looking forward to you continuing our conversation.
Thank you, Brett. Yes, indeed. Likewise for me. Thank you so much. And I'll look forward to tuning in to listen and learn from Xiaohui Liu. I love him. He's super cool. Just like you, Brett.
Well, I really appreciate that. And yeah, can't wait